I think that is problematic is to suggest that, number one, that transgender athletes are the biggest problem in women's sports. And I think this is what's bothersome, is that there's a faction of people in our country that are making this a massive...
You are Cheryl Reeve, the head coach of the Minnesota Lynx. That is an irresponsible thing to do. You are a coach for a female basketball team. Do you not think that the females are being screwed over if they have to compete against a individual born as a male? What are you talking about?
Obviously bringing Juliet over to the WNBA.
Yeah, would that be fair?
Listen, yes, it would be fair if a team from the WNBA believes that Juliet can help the team. Could he? I should say, I'm going to say he, by the way, because that's exactly what he is. Yeah, probably. But at the end of the day, right now, the WNBA consists primarily of women who have come through the traditional route, which is the WNBA draft.
Cheryl Reeve is back at the center of the debate, and critics say this time the contradiction is unfolding in plain sight. On one hand, Reeve has argued that women have spent decades fighting for opportunities inside the WNBA, only to watch some coaching, executive and front office positions go to men. On the other hand, she has publicly supported transgender inclusion in women's basketball. Those positions are now being placed side by side, and with Julie Tatar reportedly being discussed in connection with the Indiana Fever, fans are asking whether Reeve's position on inclusion would remain exactly the same if a physically dominant player entered the league and immediately became a competitive problem for teams like hers.
My views, as I said last week, I come from a space of inclusion.
All right, so right out of the gate, she frames herself as the compassionate one. And we know this is one of the oldest persuasion techniques that there is. Before she answers the question, she defines herself as inclusive, which immediately implies that anyone who disagrees must be coming from a place of exclusion. But here's the problem. The WNBA is an exclusionary league. Women's basketball exists because it excludes males. So inclusion isn't the issue. The issue is who is eligible for the female category.
And the narrative that I think that is problematic is to suggest that, number one, that transgender athletes are the biggest problem in women's sports. And that,
doing what everyone else does, notice that she changes the question. Nobody asked whether this is the biggest problem. That's a straw man. The real question is much simpler. Should males be eligible for women's sports? And she never answers that.
Reeve has made it clear that she considers herself an advocate for women throughout professional basketball. She has spoken forcefully about women losing opportunities inside a league that was created specifically to showcase female athletes, pointing not to roster spots but to coaching staffs, executive offices and decision-making positions that increasingly include men. It is the kind of argument that resonates with people who believe women should have more chances to lead within their own professional league. The message is straightforward. Women spent years building these opportunities, and those opportunities should not gradually disappear.
This is the reason why so many people, they're trying to take the WNBA seriously, and they can't. Because every day it's another narrative. It's another person pushing an agenda. It's another person trying to combat what another person says. Cheryl Reeves, you are 2 months away from being 60 years old. What the hell is this? Kathy needs to suspend you. This is terrible from you as a coach. You know better. Why are you blowing up something that's already out there? Something that people do not need to be focusing on, but to focus on the game.
But critics immediately point to what they see as the tension in that argument. Reeve has also publicly embraced transgender inclusion, including through the highly discussed shirt she wore while responding to controversy surrounding the subject. That is where opponents of her position say the logic becomes difficult to reconcile. If protecting opportunities for women is important when the conversation involves coaching or executive jobs, they ask why the same concern would not apply when the discussion shifts to roster positions, starting roles, playing time, contracts, and the limited number of jobs available to athletes competing for places in the WNBA.
Because exclusion is never the answer. Separate isn't equal. And trans lives matter. And so to take away something so valuable that sports brings to young people in particular, and what it does, as I have a youngster, and encourage them to be a part of a team, and what it gives you in the way of, whether it's teamwork, leadership, competitive, all the things, they have every right to that as well.
So that leaves an obvious question hanging over the conversation. Where exactly is the line? If Reeve believes women deserve protection from losing opportunities inside their own league, critics want to know how that principle applies across different parts of the organization. They argue that it is difficult to demand greater representation for women in the offices running WNBA teams while supporting an eligibility framework that, depending on league policy, could include transgender women on playing rosters. Supporters of Reeve would argue those are different issues. Her critics say the distinction still needs to be explained clearly rather than changing depending on the context.
And this is what I keep talking about when I say we live in a backwards society. Sophie Cunningham, a WNBA player, one of the most notable WNBA players in the league now, is trying to defend women's rights. And the same women she's trying to defend are attacking her. Because it doesn't matter what you're trying to do. It doesn't matter what you mean by it. All it looks like is you support Trump. And these women have Trump derangement syndrome. They don't understand that you're making women's sports safer and fair so that they don't have to get in a ring and box a man. So they don't have to spend their entire life training to be beaten by a man who wasn't good enough to play in the NBA. So she's doing what she can to protect the sanctity of the sports that she loves. And you guys are attacking her for it. That is the craziest, most backward shit I have ever seen or heard, bro. I've never heard anything like this. So you don't want fair sports for women?
Sophie Cunningham became part of this controversy months ago after expressing her own view that women's sports should remain based on sex. Her comments triggered a much larger public argument, and Reeve became one of the prominent figures pushing back against that position. Cunningham supporters saw her statement as a straightforward argument about competitive fairness, rather than an attack on anyone personally. That is why they now point back to Reeve's comments about women losing professional opportunities elsewhere in the league. To those critics, the tension is obvious. One argument warns about women being displaced from jobs, while another emphasizes inclusion when the job in question happens to be playing basketball.
It's primarily of women who have come through the traditional route, which is the WNBA draft. Only about 15 of the 200 players in the WNBA have come from outside leagues in other countries. So it isn't a common practice. What I don't want the WNBA to do is to go over and say, okay, we will prove what we're saying here and bring them over just because they're trying to silence the critics. That's not the reason to do it, honestly. I mean, you can listen to social media all you want, but that's not if he can truly help a team, certainly go do it. And then everybody would certainly be able to say, all right, they're putting their money where their mouth is. They don't need to do that. They don't need to do that right now. So I don't believe it would happen. And even if they wanted to, that's the question. Would they actually do it? I don't believe, ladies, that they would do it because we know what would happen. We know the differences between men and women, and he is averaging.
Reeve is hardly the only public figure who has been challenged over the consistency of positions taken during this debate. Sage Steele and others have repeatedly argued that women's sports cannot operate with one definition of fairness in one circumstance and a different definition in another. That criticism lands directly in the middle of the current discussion. People can disagree about what the correct eligibility policy should be, but whatever standard the league chooses eventually has to be coherent enough to survive difficult real-world cases. A principle that only works when the consequences remain theoretical is not much of a governing principle at all.
Julie Tattard, I think is her name, or his name, whatever.
Oh, yeah.
Trans since 2001, 6'3", averaging 20 in France's Ligue number 2. I can watch her in 2 minutes and say she would be great in the WNBA, or he would be great, whatever you want to call it. You think they'll ever do that? Think they'll pull the trigger on this woman? Guy?
That can ball, Dan. That can ball. I watched her highlights. That is a bad. Not only did she average 20 points, 20 rebounds. We're talking about a 20-20 guy. I mean, if the WNBA is inclusive, then this French all-star WNBA team has to sign her. And this is why I said I put in a franchise application, Dan. The Nashville Balls, my WNBA team, would be the greatest dynasty of all time. Most inclusive, too. We're only signing men who identify as women. Our slogan is one love, 2 balls, and we are going to absolutely just dominate.
That is where Julie Tatar enters the picture. The 34-year-old French centre has been associated with extraordinary production, including averages around 21 points and 20 rebounds, along with a 30-rebound performance described as a league record. She has also been credited with Player of the Year, Defensive Player of the Year, and Domestic Player of the Year honours in the same season. Those numbers immediately transform an abstract conversation into something much more tangible. Once a player with that kind of statistical dominance becomes connected to a WNBA franchise, every philosophical statement about eligibility suddenly has competitive consequences attached to it.
Breaking news, y'all. This right here has to fucking stop. So this trend from France plays basketball against females, which this is a male. Scores about 21 points, 7 rebounds. Pretty good. But now she wants to play with the WNBA. And the crazy thing is that the WNBA coaches are out speaking about men playing the female sport. Like, they are afraid to speak their mind because they know they will get fired. But this is wrong. You cannot allow the man to play in the female sports. They will dominate.
And that is why so many fans following the discussion are no longer interested in vague slogans. Women have spent years defending this league, defending its athletes, and demanding that female basketball players receive more attention, money, resources, and respect. They have watched players battle through college programs, overseas leagues, training camps, short-term contracts, and brutal roster cuts just for a chance to earn one of the limited WNBA jobs available. For most players, there is no shortcut. They spend years developing their games, often in gyms most fans never see, hoping their performance is eventually enough to earn an invitation to camp, much less a guaranteed roster spot. Those fans believe any eligibility policy affecting those scarce opportunities deserves precise rules rather than ambiguity.
I come from a space of inclusion, and the narrative that I think that is problematic is to suggest that, number one, that transgender athletes are the biggest problem in women's sports. And I think this is what's bothersome, is that there's a faction of people in our country that are making this a massive issue. We have some issues. Number one, we need to protect trans kids. Every kid. To me, it's a human rights issue. Every kid has a right to sports, regardless of gender diverse, transgender. Every kid has the right to access. Now, what gets nuanced is, when you're beyond puberty, when you're an Olympic sport, when you have scholarships at stake, and that sort of thing. That's where I say that common sense people get together and you find common ground to find a way to be inclusive. The answer isn't no. It is not the case that we have, quote, biological men in girls' locker rooms. The way it's being phrased, the innuendo there that somehow transgender women are predators of some kind in the locker room. There's a lot of narrative that is problematic that we need to address.
A transgender could potentially play in the WNBA. And why not? A lady named Julie Tatar, I believe they said she averages 20 and 20 overseas. They asked her a couple of days ago, if the WNBA called, would you join? She said, why not? I wouldn't say no. Let's make it happen. And I'm be honest, I watched her highlights. She doesn't look all that crazy. You know how they say, if a man turns trend and this and that, she doesn't look like she's way faster or just way stronger. She's nice, obviously, 20 and 20, but I would want to see it. If you make that happen, do you know every single arena that's going to be filled out just so people can see what exactly is going to happen? Make it happen, WNBA. Julie Tatar to the WNBA. Here we go, ugly.
You're going to let them play. Or we're going to have a real Joanna Man situation in the WNBA. Because we got to see how far you're going to take this inclusivity. See how much you're going to play into the delusion of others to see if it really is no difference. If you feel like a woman, you should be able to be in the same sports. So I'm curious if the WNBA is going to allow.
There is another group that gets lost whenever this discussion turns into a shouting match. Young girls trying to understand what pathway exists for them in professional basketball. If the WNBA wants to inspire the next generation, then the league needs rules that players, parents, coaches, and fans can actually understand. Young athletes should not have to decode contradictory press conferences, social media arguments, undefined terminology, and shifting interpretations from one week to the next. Whatever eligibility standard the league ultimately adopts, clarity matters. The people running professional women's basketball should know what the policy means before a controversy erupts rather than trying to define it afterward.
Because they will soon be unemployed. WNBA coaches and players, they have been advocating for biological men to compete in women's sports. Now, from a coach's perspective, I can understand it. As a coach, your job is to win make-believe basketball games and make it look believable. In a league like the WNBA, where 100% of the league lacks the ability to dunk, where the average player is barely 6 feet tall, what is the best way to win? Find dudes who were not capable of making the NBA and put them on your WNBA.
Those you shouldn't belong here many times, and for me, I don't want that space, especially Golden State, to ever feel like that. So I'm all about women, little girls deserving to play, and that includes trans women. So I'm all about inclusivity.
I've seen enough. LeBron James, after you're done in Philly, I want you to join the WNBA, score 80 points a game, win a championship so I can hit my parlays. It's time for men to dominate the WNBA since these bitches want that.
Not even someone from the bench. You have to understand, if we're doing like shooting workouts, skill workouts, I'm very confident in anyone that you put in front of me that I can compete. Just sheer size, athleticism, that's the problem. Yeah. Maybe I can score, but like, who am I going to defend? These guards, these point guards are like 6'6".
I think that there's so much good going on in the WNBA. I think that basketball is being played at the highest level it's ever been. I think our team in specific, we are breaking history right now with the amount of points that we're scoring on back-to-back games. I think the Minnesota game, there's just so much distraction. I think the WNBA media, all we ever do is cover everything except basketball. And it's like, what are we doing? There's so much. Like, you can talk about other things. I think those are great stories. I think it shows fans, who people are outside of the court. But I also think we got to keep the main thing the main thing. And